From humble beginnings to the pinnacle of success, one man's journey proves that with determination, anything is possible. This is Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., inspiring conversations of triumph over adversity. Here's George.
Hello, today my guest is John Y. Brown III. John was born into the family with a long history of public service in Kentucky, including his grandfather's tenure in the U.S. Congress and his father's time as governor. After serving as Kentucky's Secretary of State, John founded the JYB3 Group, which has become Kentucky's fastest growing public affairs consulting firm. John, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Honored, George. So glad to see you. I did not read the email carefully when I originally received it from you. I thought you were being interviewed, and I was going to be in a supporting role, just affirming everything you said. And then I reread it this morning, and I thought, wait, what? They want to talk to me, and this is George's show. So,
Well, John, it's my show, but it's a privilege to have you on the show, your family's history, my relationship with your family over the years. So it's a family show between the Browns and Tinsley. How about that?
I love that. And, George, that, they're doing a documentary that on my father's life that will come out next year. It sort of leaked out on social media a month or so ago, and you have a role in that, I believe, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They interviewed me there at the airport and brought out some memorabilia that I hadn't seen before. So we took some pictures and so forth. And of course, I'm probably the only person that actually played with the Colonel.
Yes.
Your father owned it, and also worked at KFC and became a KFC franchisee.
Yes,
So
sure.
that's a threesome that I don't think anybody else out there can duplicate.
No doubt about it. And, all those experiences they're, sort of very historic Kentucky experiences, and especially the early days with KFC, franchising nationwide, then worldwide, getting to work with the Colonel, and then playing for the beloved Kentucky Colonels, and having that experience too. You're a Kentucky legend, and I love your book, which I have here also on my office desk.
Much appreciated.
I love the cover. Did they touch up your arm, or do you really look that fit right?
That's really me, John.
Man.
It's a privilege, man. I want to first congratulate your mom for her recent induction into the Muhlenberg County Hall of Fame, Central City. And those days, Central City had a great basketball program also.
Yes.
And a couple of my teammates actually played at Central City. Rodney Kirtley, the Kirtley family, from there, Rodney went on to be a judge in Central City. So he and I spoke afterward. I sent your passionate speech to Rod so he could see it. And he remembered some stories, he and his mom and so forth. So, but I wanted to congratulate
Thank you.
Ellie and all the great work that she has done throughout the Kentucky. Excuse me, your whole family. So I want to start off by just asking a question. We're kind of
Sure.
working through this. What was it like growing up in the strong tradition of political service in the family there in Kentucky for you?
Yeah, it's interesting, George, because during my younger, more formative years, from 2, 3 to about 15, I didn't think of my father. I thought of him primarily as a business person. I didn't think of him as a political person. Of course, he got involved with the Democratic telethon back in the early 70s, where they raised money for the National Party. But I just I just thought of him mostly as a business person. Now, my grandfather would was in politics and would run for office, but I thought of him primarily as a great, trial attorney. And the politics was maybe his passion, but his, day-to-day job was an attorney in the courtroom. That changed when I was 15 years old and my dad announced suddenly that he was going to run for governor after marrying Phyllis, and they had that whirlwind campaign. I think they got in at the last day you could file, and ran, very, sort of did a media blitz and kind of came from nowhere and ended up winning narrowly. And I was just starting 11th grade. Was at Ballard and then transferred to Central, and it changes your life. I mean, suddenly, if you're the son of a successful business person, that's one thing, but the son of a governor where, everybody's sort of aware of that person and they're on the front pages most days, that's a whole different experience. And, it was exciting, challenging. I mean, it was exciting, obviously, on the one hand, and a great honor, from a personal standpoint. Um, when you're 16, 17, 18, trying to figure out who you are, it can make it a little tough.
Sure.
And I actually left Kentucky for a few years and went out to California, tried to go to college out there. Um, but I wasn't going to any place as much as sort of running from Kentucky, trying to be my own person. And since I didn't have any reason to be out there, came back home after a couple years after he finished his term and settled in and made my own life. So there were, but it was, I think, the 4 most exciting and rewarding years of my father's life. Like, he feels like he was, sort of an innovative and entrepreneurial, governor, did some things differently, brought some great people in, sort of changed how business is done in Frankfurt, and, and I think he really cherished those years, and he and Phyllis made a great partnership during that time. But what's interesting is because I was away, I probably I don't know as much about his tenure as I do some other governors that came later when I was living here and working in Frankfurt.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So with all that, with that background, excuse me, and having gone away, deciding to come back, did the family history kind of influence your career?
It
It
it did, George, and I graduated from Bellarmine, College and then went to University of Kentucky Law School.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather attended UK Law School, as did my father, as did my son, and that may be the only instance in the US of, 4 consecutive generations attending the same law school and having the same name. I mean, there's instances where 4 generations have attended the same law school, but not I don't think there is with the same name. So that's sort of a fun honor, and I love that.
Yeah.
When I got out, I had the opportunity to work for some law firms here in Kentucky, but my father had just started Kenny Rogers Roasters down in Florida, and he was a serial entrepreneur, and he had a few other restaurants he had started several years before then that didn't go well, but I really believed in Kenny Rogers Roasters, and as much as I love law school, I'm not sure I really was excited about practicing law. Very combative. I like to make deals and collaborate. That's more my personality. And so when he offered me the opportunity to come work for him, I took it, and I'm really glad I did. It was a great couple of years. I learned a lot from him. It was a great run. We went from 7 or 8 restaurants to about 280, I think. But probably grew a little too fast, and we were competing with Boston Market, later became Boston Chicken, and, and and they kinda outmaneuvered us. They had the blockbuster video movie, money behind them and would get the better locations, in each city, and I think they had a better model. It was, smaller buildings where they could get people in and out quicker, and we didn't really learn that until it was a little later, but we still had great success up to then, and then but just sort of hit a wall and
Yeah.
eventually sold out to a Malaysian group. I'll tell you, when I was 40, I went back to college and got an MBA on the weekends at Bellarmine, and that was all interesting and fascinating. But I learned more about business in those 2 years than I think I could have with any business degree, because when you experience business successes and failures, they're etched into your psyche forever. You don't forget them. You
That's
remember
true.
them from every angle. You live and breathe them, and you really learn from 'em. It's
Yeah.
not a hypothetical,
Yeah.
it's your
That
pocket.
that's for sure, John. Did your dad ever talk to you about how he took the Colonel and developed the KFC brand prior to selling to Hublot?
Yeah, I was, he bought out the Colonel, I believe the year I was born in 1963. He was practicing law with his father, my grandfather, in Lexington. The law firm was called Brown and Son, and my dad, how he is in Louisville. He opened his own office and named it Brown and Father. So 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 he could be in charge there, but he was too restless for the law,
Yeah.
and my grandfather was friends with Colonel Sanders. Uh, and my dad met him, I think, at a Kentucky Derby, breakfast, and they started up a conversation, and he needed a contracts attorney, and my dad started looking through the business and some of the receipts and how much money he was making, and thought, "My goodness, I think I can make more money with this than I can practicing law. It might be a lot of fun." And so my mother, you notice, from Muhlenberg County, she had a college roommate who knew a businessman in Nashville named Jack Massey, and they approached him about being an investor. And my mom and dad met with him, and he agreed to put up, I think, $2 million in 1963 to buy the kernels, and he'd give my dad 40% of the business to run it. And the colonel agreed, and they moved forward. And over the next 8 years, franchising was just taking off. And I know you know all about franchising better than about anybody in Kentucky. And it allowed KFC to just really take off. And they focused on the freestanding buildings. Um, he's a great marketer and promoter. I think that was probably his greatest talent, if you had to pick one. And Kentucky Fried Chicken, believe it or not, became the number one fast food chain in the world, for at least 1 year, I think, during that time. Dairy Queen might have been number one, McDonald's, and of course, McDonald's eventually became number one. But for a little while, KFC was
Yeah.
from
You know,
Colonel Sanders in Kentucky.
yeah, John, one of the interesting pieces here is that when I first started working with KFC, my job was as a trainer because of my teaching background at Male High School. And so uh, I did not know that I'd be working with the colonel, excuse
Right.
me, at the time. So part of the my training program was to tell the franchisees the story of Kentucky Fried Chicken and how this all unfolded. You just mentioned some things that I did not know. I knew that John and Jack Massey had bought it from the Colonel for $2 million, but I did not know the breakdown. Who the percentage of the business. The Colonel was charging 5 cents for every 9 pieces of chicken that was sold. And
Yeah.
he was sending out the flour and the seasonings to the franchisees, and he knew how to track how much of that flour was used and how many pieces of chicken was sold. Did these contracts on the back of a piece of paper. So I can envision your dad looking at this and saying, "Man, look, what do we have here?" And then I think the other innovative thing that he did that really skyrocketed the brand was when he got the Colonel on "What's My Line."
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And think of it from his standpoint. I mean, he liked food and, but he didn't have a background in food, but I think he was just sort of he was gifted as a promoter and
Yes.
salesperson, because he
Yeah.
had sold encyclopedias door to door. But when he saw the colonel in that white suit, very distinctive looking gentleman, the goatee, the string tie, and then the 11 secret herbs and spices. I mean, that's just a marketer, PR person's dream. And you're right, they got him on What's My Line, and I think he stumped the panel there and got him on the Tonight Show, and the Colonel was a marvelous,
Yes.
marketer, and at one time in the early '70s, if, I remember correctly, the 3 most recognizable faces in the world were, well, of course, our president at the time, Richard Nixon, but the other 2 were Muhammad Ali and Colonel Sanders, 2
You're
Kentucky.
exactly right.
Isn't
Yep.
that right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
And you met them both.
Yeah, got to meet them both, and the other interesting footnote is because Jack Massey was the investor, Kentucky Fried Chicken's headquarters was in Nashville, Tennessee those
Yeah.
first few years,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was a tough battle, to convince Jack to move to Kentucky, but that was the right thing to do and
Yeah.
happened around, I don't 67, 68, something like that, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of the equipment that was used in the restaurant was coming from Jack Massey's side. He
Ah,
developed the big 10-3 cooker, which cooked enormous numbers of pieces of chicken, and where the Colonel was using a pot, 16-quart pot, where he could only cook 16 pieces of chicken at a time, and it was a 13-minute process. Where this 10-3 cooker is what we called it. It could cook, I think it was like 300 pieces of chicken at one time. So, that was the big jump. Massey made his money more on the equipment side of the business. Yeah.
So, George, did you ever run across a gentleman named Don Greer at Kentucky Fried Chicken? He
No.
he was one of the early, I guess, execs and worked in franchising, and then I think he moved on to Wendy's, probably with David Thomas, but he was head of franchising at Kenny Rogers Roasters, and I was mentored by him, and then he died, unfortunately, of a heart attack, and I stepped into his role and ended up heading up franchising, and it was a wonderful experience, but what I learned was the people who came in with, the desire to make a lot of money, and they only had the money to invest, but they didn't have that restaurant experience, they didn't do nearly as well as the franchisees who had that experience, that hands-on experience working in the food business. And when you talked about you worked in training and you were in the restaurant, it takes a certain kind of person who can do that.
Yeah.
And you work when others play, and you have to be a stickler for cleanliness, detail, service mindedness. And we had a lot of people that would come in with MBAs from an Ivy League school. They'd made a lot of money in something outside of the food industry and thought, well, they'll make money as a franchisee. And boy, they would struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
John,
was,
you hit some key points there. My 3 years, I worked with KFC for 8 years, but my first 3 years were working with the Colonel and bringing my basketball team learnings and understanding of how to work with people and teams and motivating them. The teaching background when I put that together with what the colonel was preaching, and it would be little nuggets, clean as you go, all of the different little nuggets that he had. These people that were coming in and investing $1 million, each one of them were investing $1 million, and they were hanging on the lip of everything the colonel said. So we had to be careful because the colonel might say anything, and we had him in for about a half a day, and then we get him on out of there, and we take it from there. We had to hide certain equipment because he didn't approve it.
He didn't like it, right?
No,
He would
no, not
yes,
at
yes.
all. He did not like extra crispy at all. He didn't,
Yeah.
so we didn't do any extra crispy. We made sure that all of the women were dressed with long dresses versus above their knees. He had all of these things that I learned real quick how to deal with it, John. What I would do is when he would come, I'd always start out with his reel to reel video, The Portrait of the Legend, and play that. And it
Yeah.
would just melt his heart. So we were off to a running from that standpoint on.
Well, and I remember once, at the colonel's lady, he loved kids, and he would
Yeah.
give them time, and he was showing me how to mix the butter and the honey with a fork, and he was just very patiently mixing it,
Mhm.
and he would say, "And you do it just like so," and then he said, "And, I don't want people ever to get too full because I want them to come back."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought that's very wise.
Yeah.
But he was, uh, very, he was sort of a brilliant sort of, artist of type and temperamental and would let you know it. And I
Definitely
remember
temperamental. Definitely
yeah.
temperamental. Yeah.
I think it was maybe the 3rd or 4th convention, and I believe it was in Nashville, and I was maybe 3. There's a picture of me up here behind me at there, and I'm smiling at the time, but the colonel got up and just lit in
Yeah.
to everybody. He didn't like the direction things were going.
Yep.
The
Yep.
mashed potatoes tasted like, uh, some kind of glue or paste or something,
Pace,
and
pace.
uh yes,
Yeah.
and my mom was crying, I think, and my dad really didn't know what to do, and so after the colonel sat down, it was his turn, and he said, I wanna thank the colonel. We're all here trying to achieve his vision. He is a genius at what he does, and he's demanding as he should be, and we're all gonna try to live up to his lofty goals." And he was able to turn it around, to compliment the colonel, to kinda soften him, and it in that 3 or 4 minutes entirely changed the tenor in the room, and it ended up ending on a good note. And the next morning, when the colonel came into the office, my dad wasn't sure what he was gonna say to him, and he patted him on the shoulder, and he said, "You did a good job last night, Johnny," which was and they never talked about it after that, but
Yeah.
that could have been a turning point.
Yeah. Yeah, because the franchisees, no whatever the colonel said, that's what they bought into. I mean, it was they followed everything that he would suggest and point out. And he had some of those franchisees, Dave Thomas being one. He had
Yes,
some of those franchisees that had gone on and they'd made a bunch of money, you know?
yes,
Yeah. So
yes. But it was an exciting time, and, my dad sold out in 1971. They'd had the burger wars. I guess he thought they'd have the chicken wars next, and that there was no way that KFC could hold on to 80-90% market share, so, yeah, it got out, and my dad's really not an operator. I mean, he needed good operators for partners. He was more of an idea person, and, but, he if he had held on, KFC just kept growing and growing.
yeah.
But it's a great Kentucky story.
Yeah.
But if you're sort of have that entrepreneurial inclination, those types don't stick with something
Yeah, yeah.
for long periods
They
of time.
they keep moving on. So let's jump back to John the third. When
Yeah.
when did you decide to get involved in politics and start your own business?
Yeah, well, I was in Florida working for my father, and I I I w I went to work down there for several reasons. One, I believed in the concept. I thought it would be a great experience and and I thought we could do really well. And there was also part of me that felt like this is also an opportunity for me to get closer to my father, work under him, learn a lot, and strengthen our relationship. And I would say there's lots of reasons to go into business, but to improve a family relationship probably isn't one of them necessarily, it's, uh, but we had a great couple years, but I was kind of ready to move up. I had done a good work there, and he and I understand this feeling, felt like if he promoted me, it would look like, nepotism or favoritism, and he had to worry about morale among everyone else. And frankly, we had already franchised most of the US, and we were moving into international franchising, and that's a whole different animal. And we needed people with real expertise to do that. And I just wasn't what I could franchise in Iowa, Wyoming, Georgia, Nevada, but when Malaysia, I had to get out a map just to see where is that. And so it was a good time, I think, for me to step away and to try to do something on my own. So we had just had my wife had just had my son, and and that made us wanna come back to Kentucky too, and, we did, and so I got home, and I didn't have a big plan. I guess I learned that from my dad, just kind of more seat of the pants kind of way of going through life, but, I knew where I wanted to be, I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I didn't really wanna practice law, but I had some friends who encouraged me to, "Why don't you run for public office?" And Secretary of State's a good fit. You have the qualifications for that. You really don't have the qualifications for like attorney general yet. You don't have the experience. You didn't really practice law. You don't have enough years. Auditor's probably a little bit of a reach, but Secretary of State's that could be a good challenge for you. And I it's funny because I was in Florida thinking about it, and there was a woman running for Secretary of State named Sarah Mortham, I think was her name, and, I was driving home from Roasters one night, and she had a bunch of little signs on the road, and I pulled off, and I just walked back and forth, those signs, and I was thinking, Secretary Brown has a nice ring to it, I kinda like that, maybe maybe I could do that, and so, at the last minute, like my dad, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but, threw my hat in the ring, the saying, "Be bold and mighty forces will come to your aid." I heard that last year and really like it, and I think that's true. When you take chances, and, people who know you and believe people will show up and they wanna help, and it'll be people you don't even know sometimes, and some wonderful people came forward offering to help. I had a friend from law school and some friends of his ran my campaign at no cost. Larry Townsend, who I'm sure you know from, one of my dad's great confidants, he helped. And I had a ball, and, I love the camp. I love traveling around our state. I love Kentuckians. I love all parts of the state, and it was a fun time to run for public office in the, mid-1990s. Things is different than today, much more civil and respectful, and I'm friends with all my opponents, and, we stay in touch, and we're friends on social media and so forth, wish each other well and our families. But it was a wonderful experience, and I got to work in Frankfurt for 8 years and, um, and loved it. And I, you know, and nothing like having good mentors, and I had some good mentors that I found and listened to them. And I think that's sort of a lost or dying art sometimes.
Yeah.
You can be ambitious and talented, but if you don't have a mentor that it cares about you and knows the ropes, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes and some painful mistakes, unnecessary mistakes. And I just think having good mentors is so, so important in life. And I was lucky to have several, and I loved the experience, and started a family, and I and and got to a front row seat of observing Kentucky politics, and and we have some wonderful people, and but it's a very human process, and I got to see a side of, you can't learn, just like you can't really learn business by studying it. You can learn some. You can't really learn politics by studying political science. You can only learn so much. You have to experience it, I think. And it was a great privilege. And I stepped away for a while because I could have run for state auditor, but my heart wasn't in it, and and then I sort of got out of cycle, but ran for lieutenant governor, 4 years after that with Jody Richards, and we lost, but he was such a gentleman and a wonderful human being. It was, I and my family and I, we loved every minute of that, just being part of that team, having that experience, and, it's in life, the older I get, it's not about always winning, it's about the experiences that you have, taking chances, and the people that you associate with along the way.
Yeah.
I saw a meme last year, that says, "Is life a journey or destination?" I thought, "Oh, I know the answer to this. It's a journey." But I looked at the bottom, it said neither.
Yeah.
It's your friends that you invite to join you along the way, or
Yeah.
that you choose to
Yeah.
join, and I thought, "Boy, that isn't that true?" You
Yeah.
know?
So,
Yeah.
John, the JYB 3 group, yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we started, I, um, I wasn't sure after I lost the lieutenant governor's race, I wasn't sure what to do. I'd worked at Res Care, and that was fine, but I had a bit of a restlessness, about me too, sort of similar to my dad's, not as intense, but I like politics and I like business, um, and I kinda like the idea of being my own boss, and I think sometimes when you hit about 40, um, at least it's been true with a lot of my friends, we've talked about it, you kinda wanna try to build something yourself, wanna go out on your own, and, I decided to try to start my own lobbying firm, and did that 16 years ago, and have been very fortunate. I have a couple of great partners, and we have wonderful clients, and I get to mix politics and business. I get to be around both, and I really enjoy that. And it's not for everybody. It's probably not for most people, because it's a lot of ups and downs and uncertainty. But but I don't mind that. I'm kind of wired for that. I kind of like it, and now it's been 16 years. And back when I made the decision, I worked for a wonderful company, but I just, I was afraid I would wake up one day and I'd be retiring in middle management. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to take some chances. I would rather try and fail several times than not. And I'm glad I took a chance. And it's fun being your own boss. And you can only get mad at yourself,
Yeah.
it, but now the downside is, with that previous job at 5 o'clock, I'd get in my car and go home, and I wouldn't think about business until 9 o'clock the next morning. That's nice. I gave that up. When you're your own boss, you never turn off you're always a little bit, at least in the back of your mind. And you have to adapt to that as you know better than I do. But but that's okay, and but it's an exciting life, you're building something, and, like being a franchisee, and I tried to be a franchisee. I thought I wanted to be a franchisee at Kenny Rogers Roasters. In Georgia, I went through the training school, and I had just finished law school and graduated with honors, but by day 3, it was clear I was gonna flunk out of the thing, and people were pulling for me, trying to help me, but I was at the bottom of my class, and I said, "You know what? I need to be in the office on this one. I don't need to be in the kitchen." Yeah, and, they very politely, excused me, and, I got back to the, corporate office and fell down on my knees and said, I'm sorry, you all, I'm not sure what I was thinking, but I'm not a I'm not a restaurant guy."
Well, you
Uh,
gave it a shot anyway,
I did give it a shot, yes.
you
So
know?
great admiration for you and all you've done, and, it's a great, great success story, and I went to the U of L Bellarmine game last night and, saw a lot of KFC food there, so it was,
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Was that, did they honor, Wesley Cox at that event?
you know, we my mom is, as you know, having some health issues, and so we left at halftime. And
Okay,
I don't know. I
okay.
hope they did
Yeah.
because I was a great fan of his. I was a teenager back when he was a star, and, that was at a time in my life where all I thought about was basketball,
Mhm.
and he was, one of the great, great heroes, for the Cardinals.
Yeah, he was a gentle giant and, really a nice guy and probably 3, 4 years ahead of you. You mentioned you were
Yeah.
at Ballard, I
Yes.
think when that busing started in '76,
Yes.
probably is when you went to Central.
That's
That
right.
that's when Darryl was there at Mail at that time, uh,
Yes.
and I was coaching there with, Wade Houston.
Ah,
Matter of
right.
fact, Ballard actually beat us in 70, in 1976, that year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had Alphonse Miller, Jeff Lamp was there, I
Yep.
think, and and I when I transferred to Central, I went to the first day of basketball practice, and there were 6 players dunking, and one was trying to do a 360 like Darryl did, and I thought, "Okay, I'm just gonna looks like I'm gonna be a fan."
Yeah, you had Martin Dunbar on that team and, Lee Raker, among and Jerry Eaves on that particular team.
Yeah.
Yeah, that,
Well, it was fun. It was we had a great run. I love going to the games, and I still see some of those players, see them around town, and it's fun to reminisce. Because there's just I don't think there's any state that loves basketball more than Kentucky. I know there's Indiana and North Carolina may give us a run for their
yeah,
money, but I
yeah.
went but there's just no state that loves
Yeah, there's
basketball more.
nothing like Kentucky. Just a little short note there, Martin Dunbar, who played on that team, his dad became the first black franchisee in Louisville, KFC
Ah,
franchisee there on East Broadway.
I'll bet. I'll be. That's, well, and I wanted to tell you, my mom says tell you hi, and glad to hear how well you're doing, and, I brought her a copy of your book, and she saw the cover too. She focused on the half with the suit and tie. She said, "He was always such a nice dresser and such a gentleman."
John, that was my daughter's idea to, we were doing a photo shoot and she suggested that we do the half, suit and half, at workout outfit. So, it kind of stuck, after that. So, but looking back, tell me a little bit about your family, and your first of all, your sisters and brothers and your family.
Well, I have 2 full sisters, here in Kentucky.
Mhm.
One kinda worked in, real estate and development, and sort of retired recently, and have another who's taught kindergarten in Lexington for about 30 years. And then I have a half brother and a half sister from my father, from Phyllis. And Lincoln is the older of the two, and he's sort of a entrepreneur too. Has had a number of different businesses. Just got out of a sort of healthcare business and trying to get into something new now. And then Pamela, who's you may recognize on CNN. She's one of
Yes.
the anchors there and
Yeah.
doing very well. And I'm so proud of her and just kind of marvel at, I was in the bank the other day and I hear his familiar boy. I turn around and there she is explaining, you know, some Supreme Court case to us. And I was like, I just can't believe it. But
Yeah.
she's just had her third child and is doing very well. And then my wife and I have been married for 33 years and have two children. One is an attorney for the at the Attorney General's office now and is working in Medicaid fraud. That's John Brown the fourth.
Uh-huh.
And he loves politics and loves the law. And then my daughter Maggie is finishing up at Tulane Law School and is going to work for a New York firm when she gets out. So they both are a little tougher than their dad. They not only got through law school and did well, but they're practicing law. And when they come home and we're all in a car together, the two of them start talking, and I'll try to jump in and say something, and they'll pause for a minute, then just keep talking to each other. Like it kind of hurts my feelings.
It's funny how that happens, John. I've experienced that myself. You know, it's like you pass. You no longer can relate to and add
I
to the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I joked with him over the high. I said, "Now come on, you all." For a while, I felt like I was the smartest one in the family when you all were little bitty, and this is hard on me now that you all have surpassed me. Just if I say something, just pause for a moment and say, "That's a really good point, Dad," and then start talking to each other. Just throw me a crumb, something, please. But I'm real proud of them, and they're doing great, uh, and it's fun seeing them get their bearings and start to create their own lives. And I just don't have any particular ambition for them other than I hope that they're good people and find something that they're passionate about and pursue that. And and I think they are, and that makes me really happy.
That's good. That's good. I noticed that you've done some writing yourself. Um,
Yeah, that was fun. Now it was, um, I had a friend, Jonathan Miller, started a blog and asked me to. It was he called it the Recovering Politician blog, and I just said I don't want to write about politics, and he said, "Well, you can write about whatever you want to." So I just wrote about kind of personal stuff, some humorous stuff, occasionally something that was meant a lot to me, and it was really fun. And then at the end of that experience, I picked about the 50 or 60, favorite posts that I made and put it into a book, mostly just because that was a bucket list item, and uh, and and so I can say I've published, but not like yours, which is sort of a real book that people buy and talk about and gets, but but it was a lot of fun and kind of forces you to think through things and be more introspective and tie life events together. I mean, I'm sure that process was similar for you. I mean, we think we have a good handle on our life, but when we sit down and try to write about it in any meaningful way, we start to see new connections and get new insights into it. And and it's a wonderful process.
yeah,
Apart from the end product of the book, I think it's very rewarding personally.
yeah. Yeah, I know it took me a year really to put this second book together, and autobiography, and it was a very enlightening as I look back and flashing flashbacks of the different, obstacles and, opportunities that I, went through. I will mention to you that, the period that I played with the Kentucky Colonels,
Yes.
growing up, at that time, excuse me,
Sure.
the Colonels played at the convention center down on 6th Street, yes, and I actually grew up about a mile from there in the East
Oh,
End of Louisville, which is Old Walnut Street, which
yes.
became Muhammad Ali, and, of course, over in Smoketown, which is right across Broadway. So a lot of the people that I grew up with, having played in Mail and the Dirt Bowl and all of that, which was a real biggie for most athletes that, basketball players that grew up around Kentucky to actually play in that Dirt Bowl. Uh, excuse me. Gene Rhodes was the coach
Oh,
of the
yeah.
Colonels. Gene was
Yep.
my high school coach.
I saw that in
Yeah.
the book.
Yes.
I did not know he coached, high school at,
Yes.
yeah.
He was, he was a live wire, best put it that way. He was the red light that comes on now on the buzzer at the end of the game, they
Yes.
brought that, on because we lost to Seneca in a last second shot in 1965. We'd actually had Seneca down 20 points at halftime, but we slowed the ball down and eventually Wes Unseld was in, foul
Uh,
64, I'm sorry, was in
right.
foul trouble. But bottom line, last second shot by Jesse Kurt and, Humzy Essen was the referee, and after the game, Gene Rose took his whistle, walked up to him, took his whistle, and he hit him with it. So that was the end of his career at coaching, at Male, and so he left there and he went to Western and came back. So they bought my contract from, Washington Caps. I actually was drafted by the Oakland Oaks, but moved to Washington. They bought my contract, and Gene knew me as a defensive player. And Roger Brown was one of the tough players.
Right.
John Brisker, Pittsburgh,
Oh,
and so
yes.
forth. So I was brought in to defend those guys behind. I was a sixth man coming off the bench, but a lot of those fans from the Louisville area would come to the game, and they were sitting back behind the bench, and they was hollering, "Put Tinsley in the
Champ,
game. Put Tinsley in the
champ,
game."
your name.
And yeah,
Yes.
and Coach Rose wasn't, and that bothered him after a while because a couple of games I went in, I think it was Los Angeles Stars. I went out and had 8 straight jumpers in the game, and the one shot I missed was when he took me out of the game, and they really gave him, hell, about that. So I think he was a little relieved to, I think I wound up averaging about 7.5 points a game, and of course, the whole dynamics changed at the end of that year. The ownership, and
Right.
general managership changed then.
Did Zelmo Beatty play for the LA
Yes.
Stars?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh my god, what a great name.
Yeah.
And John Brisker, he was about as tough a customer as there was in the
Yeah.
ABA, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was a scoring machine, but he would flake out in a minute, and, he would he was doing a lot of crazy things, but he went on to the NBA, played over there with Seattle with, Bill Russell, and, then he left the country and disappeared.
You can make a movie about his
Yes.
life.
Mhm.
And there is a documentary, as you probably know, coming out about the ABA late next year. Coach Carl put together a group, and I think they've done a really nice job telling the ABA story by ABA people.
Yeah.
History is sometimes written by the victors, and the and the ABA story has really never been fully told, and I think it'll do well. It's a great story, and you're part of it, and it was sort of the very entrepreneurial and
Yeah.
very American, and 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 the merger, I think, made the NBA a much better league, a much more
Definitely.
fun
Yeah,
looking.
definitely. The,
Uh,
there were teams that you got that paycheck and you ran to the bank to make sure it
yes.
didn't bounce. And you didn't know whether that team was going to be there the next month or exactly what was going
Right.
to happen. We had all kind of characters on these teams. Me and Kentucky Colonels with Jim Goose Ligon was
Yes.
one of the characters we had there. Hell of a ball player, but coming from his circumstances and his contract, I think he was actually paid to. There were certain things in his contract that probably will never be publicized.
Well, and you played with the original Splash Brothers, I guess,
Yes,
right?
yes, Louis and Daryl.
Lily and Daryl.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Daryl,
eh
Daryl and I talk at least once a month. At,
oh,
at
man.
least once a month.
Oh.
Yeah,
Well, they were legendary, and back then, even though they were the league's three-point shooting leaders, um, it wasn't anything like the NBA now where you have teams shooting 35, 43s in a game. That
right.
was, 10 or so, but I was at my mom's, uh Hall of Fame induction at Muhlenberg County last week, and I was telling some stories about the ABA afterwards. And one that you'll appreciate was, yeah, I mean, it was just so unorthodox and everything just you just kind of shoot from the hip and take it a day at a time. But I remember one night, David Vance brought a player named Jim Bradley over to the house at about 9 o'clock at night. It was dark out and they were trying to decide, do we pick him up or not? And my dad said, well, let's go see what you got. And I remember Jim Brand, I was sitting with him. He's like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, we've got a basketball goal outside. My son shoots on that, spray painted a free throw line, 3-point line. Jim had on like platform shoes and and we put a floodlight on so you could see him play, and he just starts shooting, and, he's got this great one ha and I think Dan Issel once said of him, "If you could put my heart in his body, we'd have the best player in the ABA," and, but they watched him with a floodlight on, shooting in the backyard, and after about 10 or 15 minutes said, "Alright, let's sign him up." That's how,
Wow. Yeah.
that would could you imagine anything like that happening today in the NBA?
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
it it didn't, and it was a very, very interesting time, and a lot of Kentucky players got an opportunity throughout those early years to have an experience on the Colonels team. I think that they didn't become stars, but there were a number of guys. You mentioned Jim. There's a Jim Bradley from right there in Louisville. That Howard Wright. Those guys were Louisvillians that had a chance to play, and it meant something,
Ah,
to play for your home team. So,
I remember Ron Thomas, the
yep,
plumber.
yep,
I
the
loved
plumber.
seeing him come in, and I think that was the secret to they had some U of L and UK players, and that helped tremendously. Um, when, the leagues merged and the parents decided that it couldn't get the local support needed and it was too big a risk. He ended up with the Buffalo Braves with the money from the draft and tried to get them to Kentucky so Kentucky would have a team, but it wouldn't have been the same. It didn't have Louis and Dan or Ron. And I think it would have been different and tougher. Having those local players that fans grew up with and had gotten to know really helped. They're there at the game chanting, "Put in George,"
Yeah,
"Put in George,
yeah.
put in," you know.
Yeah. Well, the
Uh,
tough thing for the Colonels was battling against the U of L and the University of Kentucky crowds, and the attendance just kind of it's all about butts and seats, and that wasn't happening when they moved to the fairgrounds that really kind of picked up. Of course, we had Dan and had Issel and team really played. What the year won the championship? What 76? Was it 76?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. They had a
And
great team then.
Artis had, was it 28 points and 31 rebounds, or
Yeah,
31 points, 28 rebounds? Incredible. That was just one of the greatest nights of my life after
yeah,
the birth of my children and my marriage. That's one of the top 5 for sure. For a long time, it was number 1 until I grew up. And there's nothing like that ABA ball. I went to a semi-pro game about 2 weeks ago here where they play with red, white, blue ball, and I forget how beautiful a thing it is to
yeah,
watch that
yeah,
ball spin after each shot.
yeah. There was nothing like watching Louis' three-pointer, that beautiful spin on his shot. I mean, it was, yeah, he and Daryl they could jack it up there.
Yep, and I told the person making the documentary, I said, "Watching the NBA back then was like watching basketball in black and white. Watching the ABA was like watching it in Technicolor." And I think that's true, and you're a living legend and a beloved member of our community forever because of because of basketball, but then also because of your business acumen and KFC, and it's just a great honor to get to be with you and talk and visit today, and you're loved by our family, and, I just, appreciate who you are, you've done, and, that you would, wanna spend some time talking to me today.
John, it's been my pleasure, and to get to know you even more. So, I remember we first met, but now to hear your stories and talk about the family history, a great family, and so forth. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with as we come to the close of this session?
When they put up a hometown hero banner for my mom and dad a few months ago, and I got to say a few words, and I said, a cousin of mine asked me what it was like growing up with my dad, and I it kinda caught me off guard, but I said, "I heard a lot of 'who says' growing up." And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, he would just come up with these ideas and people would say, 'Well, you can't do that, John.' Well, I need to say, 'Who says who? Says who?'" And, you wanna put, fried chicken in a red and white bucket. He said, "You can't do that." He "Says who?" You can't just buy a basketball team, you don't have any experience in it. Says who? And you can't run for governor at the last minute. He said, "Says who?" And then on and on and on. And I think growing up and seeing that challenging conventional thinking, if you're inclined to take a risk and someone tells you you can't do it, just say, "Says who?"
Right.
and do it anyway. And I close by saying, and if you do that enough times, in 50 years, maybe you'll get one of these banners too for yourself.
Good, good. And let me one quick thing when you were saying that I thought about Ollie's Trolley. Are there
Oh,
any
I
of those
was
still out there?
Oh, I go at least once a month, and Ollie was like the Colonel. He had the 23 secret herbs or whatever it is,
Uh-huh.
and he was a cantankerous, interesting character. The problem was you couldn't market him like the Colonel. They and it and Ollie's came out at a time when Burger King was saying, "Have it your way." Wendy's was saying, "Have it. We have 256 choices for you." And Ollie said, "I've made the best hamburger in the world, and if you want it any other way, you can go F yourself." That was a direct quote from him, and that they were well, you can't put that on a marquee,
Yeah, yeah,
but
right, right.
it's an awfully good burger, and I love it, and also afterwards, you had rallies come along and at Checkers where they had the double drive-through, but, it's a unique burger, probably not as mainstream, but I still think it's as good as any burger in town. I love it, and I'm glad we still have one. It may be the only real there's one in Cincinnati, there's
Okay.
one in DC that's really they don't use the original ingredients, but if you can still experience the original Ollie burger down
Yeah.
in Louisville, Kentucky, down on 3rd Street, and if you haven't, don't miss out.
Yeah, I've gotta make sure I make a stop there the next time I'm in because that was a really unique burger. Tasted great. That was part of Dan Issel's contract, I think, wasn't it? Did he get a couple?
I could guarantee you that my dad probably put in the quirkiest things in all these contracts because he just loves to negotiate. And
Yeah.
I can see him getting a 11th hour and finally, well, I'll throw in an Ollie's trolley for it. Okay, we'll close the deal. What am I gonna do with an Ollie's trolley? But
Right. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
you won't regret it, and you'll have to tell me what you think.
I
But
will. I will.
yeah,
John,
yeah,
thank you. I greatly appreciate it. And please say hello
well,
to your mom for me
I
and
absolutely will.
best
I
of luck
absolutely
moving
will.
forward.
You got it, sir. Thank you so much, George. Appreciate it.
This has been Catch as Catch Can. Your success story is waiting to be written. What will you catch today? Go to tinsleyspeaks.com for exclusive content, resources, and opportunities. Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr. is a production of Advantage Media.